Guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're going to be looking at project management. Is 217MANEL, and we're going to be covering questions 1 to 3. The first thing, obviously, we're going to be looking at is going to be an introduction, and within the introduction, we're going to be covering the first 3 questions. And within these questions, we'll be trying to go into a little bit more depth and detail and breaking these questions down, as well as understanding the key words. We'll be looking at the assignment task linked to the assessment question, and then we'll be looking at obviously the assessment questions, including project management, how we define it, its characteristics, its frameworks. We'll be looking at methodologies, different types of methodological types, and then we'll be looking at effective teams and management and qualities of management teams. Look at the questions. So when we look at the questions as in the assignment brief, it says define a project, its characteristics, and the role of the project manager. So it's first saying define a project. Then let's look at its characteristics and what is the role of the project manager. It says to justify the application of theoretical frameworks and methodologies within a project environment. So here we'll be looking at what do we mean by methodologies and what are some of the different types of methodology frameworks that we can actually work within. And then the third question says to critically calculate the composition and management of teams in a project environment. So how can we critically analyze the composition and management of teams in a project environment? So some of the key words. Some of the key words, obviously, in question 1 is define. And define means to state or describe exactly the nature, scope, or meaning of something. So define. And that was talking about defining what a project is. But obviously we need to go a bit further than that, and once we've defined it, maybe look into it a bit more and see whether or not we agree with it. Question 2, the key word there was to justify, and justify means to show or prove to be right or reasonable. To justify, prove something to be right or reasonable. And then in question 3, the key words there are critically evaluate. Critically evaluate, which is you must provide your opinion or verdict on whether an argument or set of research findings is accurate. Okay, so that's the key words within the questions that we looked at before. So if we're looking at this question, obviously the assignment brief said that you have to provide a 15-minute presentation, and the 15-minute presentation should be followed with a PowerPoint presentation between 10 and 14 slides. So I'm suggesting that you select a company and provide an introduction into that company. Then provide 2 definitions of project management. And once you've done the 2 definitions of project management, discuss this a little bit and tell me whether or not you think these are correct, whether you agree with them or do not agree with them, or you think project management means something else. Let me know what your thoughts are. Then the next part that you need to cover will be to review the characteristics of projects and to relate these to your chosen company task. The next point is to look at and discuss traditional, which is also called waterfall type methodologies, and how these compare to agile type methodologies. And also, what do we mean by methodology or project management? And relate this to your company, and how you will use this and why. And then finally, to critically evaluate the composition of the management teams in your project and who would choose to conduct your company project. So what we're saying is that the task states you must, um, you know, select a company, and then within the company there is an office plan, and in the office plan it has cubicles, and the task requires you to management the plan, removing the cubicles into an open space. So you need to follow this in relation to your company that you're choosing. And then finally, you need to provide conclusions and any future changes. So this is what I'm suggesting that you follow, and this actually covers all the questions. It covers defining project management. It looks at the characteristics of projects and what projects actually are. It looks at the different types of methodology. What is a methodology? It looks at different types of methodologies, including traditional, which is similar to waterfall in comparison to agile type methodologies, and then to evaluate the composition of management teams, which actually takes into consideration all the questions in the assignment brief. So when we're talking about project management, we're really asking the question is, you know, what do we need doing, and when does it need to be done? Where does it need to be done? Who's going to do it? How is it going to be done? And why? What's the purpose of doing this? So we're asking these questions in terms of project management: who, what, where, when, how, and to getting this right can actually cost the company more money or less money in terms of how the project is carried out. Even if we look at major projects that the government undertakes with the rail systems and the rail networks going up from London to Birmingham, we can see that the project is supposed to last a certain time, and it's gone way over budget. It's gone way over time in terms of what they're suggesting, and suggesting when it will be finished. So these consequences of conducting yourself and with projects, and specifying what needs to be done with the right management team is extremely important, because it can cost your company a lot of money unless you get it right. Some definitions of project management. One definition could be a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to accomplish a unique product or service. That's the PM book Guide 2000, page 4. Says that project management is the application of processes, methods, skills, knowledge, and experience to achieve specific objectives according to the project acceptance criteria within agreed parameters. Project management has final deliverables that are constrained to a finite timescale and budget. So here, the second definition seems to be a little bit more specific in terms of what it's talking about. It's talking about project objectives, to put acceptance criteria within agreed parameters. We're talking about deliverables that are constrained to finite timescales and budget. And we're talking about the application of processes, methods, skills, and knowledge and experience to achieve the objectives of the project. So I kind of actually like the second definition more than the first one, because it seems to be more specific in terms of more constraints, more characteristics of project management. But again, there are many definitions out there. But see what you think, and then kind of discuss these and tell me what's your conclusion in terms of project management. What are some of the goals of project management? Well, the goals of project management really are to better control of financial, physical, and human resources, because ultimately we've only got so much money to complete the project, and when we're actually completing the project, in most projects, going to require a lot of going to require manpower, and it's the use of those human resources which can either cost more money or things can be done efficiently and on time within or on budget. So is how these people are going to be managed in order to achieve your targets on time in budget. Improved customer relations, shorter development times in terms of you know achieving and implementing things, lower costs, goals of project management. If you manage something in a systematic way, then you can actually lower costs by reducing the time taken. Higher quality and increased reliability. Higher profit margins, definitely higher profit margins if you are undertaking projects for customers. If you're building a loft conversion and you've got a project, well, then obviously, if you are doing things to time, to budget with the quality, then you're not only gaining greater word of mouth advertising in terms of reputation, but also you're achieving your profit margins. But the longer it takes, is the smaller your profit margins because more it's going to cost you in materials and labour. Improved productivity, better internal coordination, and higher workforce morale. Definitely, and all this leads to really improved efficiency, productivity, and use of human and financial resources, which leads to greater profits within an organization if you're offering specific services to other customers. So these are some of the goals. Again, we'll be still asking the question of who, what, where, when, and why. Let's look at some of the constraints of a project, which we will touch on, and some of the characteristics of a project. I mean, a project will have a goal, and the goal will be, specific and detailed. What is it that you are trying to achieve, or you are trying to accomplish with that project? The project will have time period. It won't be indefinite. How long should it take to complete? And then it will have costs. What should be the cost? So, these three constraints of scope, cost, and time are the constraints which the project manager has to work within. And it's really trying to adopt methodologies and methods to best undertake the project to achieve everything in the most efficient and effective way with the resources that you have, to the quality that you need to meet in order to make the profit or meet the customer's needs. So it's all about the scope of the goal with the cost and within the time that was specified. Of the project management framework, again, the core functions we've seen above, the core functions listed above, which was the aim, the scope, the time it takes, and the cost. But adding to that core function is also the quality, because you want to do a good job, and you want to do a good job to the satisfaction of the customer. So if the quality or the standard's not there, then even though you met the scope, time, and cost, then maybe you haven't met the quality to meet the needs of the customer. In addition to that, you've got facilitating functions. Facilitating functions which will include human resource management. Human resource management because you're going to need people, and the right people at the right time with the right cost, to be part of these teams to carry out this project. You definitely need good communication within the project when you've got different team members working. They could be in the same company in one location. They could be from a global perspective, working all around the globe. And in that way, on which way you would need good communication management. And when later on we talk about traditional or waterfall as opposed to agile methodology approaches, then we'll see that in agile type approaches we need amazing, superb communication, and without it, things can fall down. Again, you've got risk management and you've got procurement management as well. So these are some of the facilitating functions that tie in to a project management or project integration management. When we look at some of the project management tools, you've seen some of these tools before, and some of these tools include Gantt chart, sample network diagram, sample enterprise project management tool. Look at the Gantt chart. We can see the Gantt chart, and most of you have used these before. Will include different sections, and each section will have a time period in terms of what you want to achieve, and within that section you will have subsections of elements that need to be achieved in order to achieve that whole section. So that's this section here is concept, so you would have different elements within that, including evaluating current systems, defining requirements, defining specific functionality. And again, each of these elements will have specific times, and these elements will then overall combine to meet that time period of that area concept, for example, or web design. So you can have a Gantt chart, and here you can allocate times to specific parts of the project, like the concept, website design, the website development, and that would have, and some of these can cross over into the other areas. So the whole timeline would give you a period of when you want each element to happen or should be completed by. You can have a sample network design and working with nodes, working with different stages of the development of a project, A, B, C. For instance, if you are building a house, then you would want to do the foundation first. You can't start building the house until you've done the foundation. And if you're going to build the foundation, well, then you would put what would be the start date, what would be the finish date, and how many days do you expect it to take, the duration. And then that would lead you on to another section and another section, and so on and so forth. So you can have sample network design, and you can also have sample enterprise project management tools. And here you can have different projects going on at the same time, and then you can have the different areas that you'll be reviewing in terms of the scope, the schedule, and the budget. And within those projects, you can actually see what's actually going well and what's not going well. Where you have major problems, where you have some problems, and what is actually going to plan. And this will then allow you to take corrective action within those projects. When we're dealing with projects, we're actually dealing with people, and we could be dealing with people from a global perspective or people from a domestic people, but we're dealing with people, and it's how these people come together to work effectively within a management team to achieve your aims and objectives within the time specified according to the scope and within budget. So that is very important to know, that projects can succeed or fail depending upon the composition of the team, which we will look at later in terms of the composition and critically evaluating these elements. So what are some of the characteristics of a project? Well, a project is typically for a customer, but not always the case, because you can have a project in-house. So it could be for your own company. So you could be working, so your company is not the customer, but you can be doing projects for customers, but it can be in-house as well. A project is temporary in nature. It typically has a defined start date and a defined endpoint. So normally you'd have a start date when you want it to start and an end date. But a lot of projects we look at the news with the government projects and so on and so forth, can take a lot longer than they had anticipated. a project of doing testing and reaching testing for the coronavirus. The government wanted to achieve 100,000 tests a day by the end of April. So, they had a clearly defined objective in terms of what they wanted: 100,000 tests a day of the coronavirus by the end of April. Did they achieve that? I'm not too sure that they have achieved that. They know when they started, they know when they wanted to achieve this 100,000 tests per day, and I don't think they have actually achieved it. Now, the project will have a unique set of requirements that need to be delivered within the boundaries of this project. So, you would need to work within a set of requirements to be delivered within boundaries. A project can be typically be more of a one-off endeavor rather than something that's happening all the time in a repeated fashion. And I agree with that as well. Project is, is a one-off type thing. We have different projects going on in our company at the moment. I'm a course manager for London College Contemporary Arts, and we're trying to produce a database that integrates all the information, but also takes into consideration the needs of different members of staff, from human resources, from the course managers in hospitality, business, and in fashion and photography. So we can see, that this database system is trying to meet the needs of many different people in the organization at many different levels. A project is not a business as usual, which is more akin to a process. So it's not business. And a project can, very often be cross-functional or indeed cross-organizational. So I agree with that, because normally projects don't necessarily just sit within one department, and usually to implement projects it can involve, a lot of times it does involve, different departments and different people in different parts of the organization. So different people need to come together. The project that we're doing with the database now, includes recruitment, it includes selection, it includes the course managers, it includes admin, it includes senior members of the board, it includes administration. So it includes a wide range of people from at different levels and different departments of the organization. But there are other. Let's look firstly at some of the, which we've looked at already, some of the project and conflicting constraints. So obviously we have the scope, and the scope defines the need that the customer has, or the organization has, or the requirements expressed and implied. What is it exactly that you're trying to achieve? What is it that, at the end of this project, you will be able to do, or you will have? Time. The project is usually required by a customer at an agreed date, and normally, every project will have a date. It can't be ongoing, and it can't be indefinite. There will be a start date and a finish date, because if you're doing this project for someone else, then obviously it's going to incur a cost. So it cannot be indefinite, and it will have a start date and an end date. Again, building into the project constraints and conflicting constraint project and constricting constraints, we're saying to ourselves, what standards do we need to meet? What does it need to achieve? Because you can't just produce it to any standard. It needs to be produced to a standard that it is acceptable to the customer or your line manager or whoever you're trying to complete this project for. And obviously resources. I mean, what is the amount of money that you have to spend on this? What is the budget that is available to be expended on the project? And again, you only have so many resources. In addition to that, how much do you have in terms of manpower and resources to actually put into this project? Because financial investment in terms of the project, how much is it going to cost, but also man hours as well, which is also costly. how much are you prepared to put in, because you might actually take out different people from different parts of the organization to actually, complete this project. And again, the more time they are spent out of their role costs the company more money. Some of the other characteristics of the project, it needs to be implemented and complete. The project need to, formulate a schedule, and organize the team. This is all part of the characteristics of project management. You need to keep track and see what needs to be done next. It needs to be monitored. Other characteristics include innovative and adapting to circumstances, because the project never really goes in one line. Usually with any project you come up with difficulties and you come up with problems or snags, and sometimes you need to overcome these. You need to monitor results against plans, and you really need to kind of like take corrective action. So when we're looking at these, so in addition to the characteristics of a project as previously explained, there are additional ones. Formulate schedules, organizing the teams, keep track, see what needs to be done, innovating and adapt to circumstances, monitor the results, taking corrective action. Okay, so qualities of a manager, because if you remember in question one, we're looking at the definition of a project, the characteristics of a project, as well as the role of the project manager. So the project manager himself, he really needs to be innovative and maintain stability within the project management team. The project manager needs to be able to see the bigger picture and also get his hands dirty, get involved in the project himself. But he can't just leave it up to his staff and be hands off. He needs to be hands on, which leads on to the second one, which is hands on rather than hands off. He obviously needs to encourage his team, but at the same time, you can't always just encourage your team. You need to put your team under pressure as well to achieve and to perform. You need to be, flexible, firm, team versus organization. So again, there's a kind of like a fight going on between wanting to do things in the team's interest to achieve the objectives, and also the constraints that you're working on within the organization. So these qualities of a manager are absolutely essential, and the manager needs to be effective enough to have all these qualities if he's going to be successful. What are some of the core traits that this project manager should have? Well, he should be system thinking. He should know about the systems, the processes and practices of his organization or the organization that he's trying to achieve the project for. So he needs to know and to work within that and to follow those processes and procedures, because sometimes if you don't, then it's not really going to work. For instance, if you're doing a database for determining which students you want to withdraw at our college in LCCA, well, then there's a certain system, there's a various process. The process is the students will have a 4-week trial. The 4-week trial, and then after that, reports need to be made on terms of their attendance, in terms of the work that they've done. Reporting systems need to be done. This needs to be fed into the database. So there's certain systems where information in terms of our policies and procedures needs to take place. So the manager really needs to know about his own systems and his processes and his practices, and so that will lead and direct how and influence what is done within the project and how it's actually done. Personal integrity, being proactive. He needs to have these traits. He needs to be proactive, and he needs to have personal integrity. High emotional intelligence. He needs to be connected and know exactly what's happening in the team, and understand his team, because it's the team who's going to actually carry all this out. His team is going to report to him, but it's his team that's going to be producing all the detail and getting the different elements done at different stages within different sections. This core, the manager needs to have effective time management. He's going to have, set boundaries, can have to work within time constraints, budget constraints, and the scope constraints, as well as resource constraints, and he's going to have a team of people working for him to achieve a specific thing with a specific end date. So he needs to have good organizational skills, and he needs to have good time management skills, and knows what he needs to do when. He also needs to be a good, skillful politician and optimist. He needs to be an optimist to keep going and to be positive, and he needs to be skillful, not to undermine people within the organization or within the project team, and therefore taking on some principles of Maslow, Hertzberg's, and McGregor's X and Y theory to continually motivating his staff to achieve their objectives within budget on time. So these are some of the core traits of what the project manager should actually have when he's managing the product. Good. Project methodologies. So we've looked at and defined the project, what a project is. We looked at the characteristics and the role of the project manager. The role of the project manager in terms of his roles, his responsibilities, his skills needed, his traits needed. Now we're kind of moving on to the kind of like the second question in terms of some of the methodologies that are available. But rather than go into methodology types, we're looking at what we mean by project methodologies first, and then we will look at some of the methodology types. So when we are looking at methodologies, project management methodology is a strictly defined combination of logically related practices, methods, and processes that determine how best to plan, develop, control, and deliver a project throughout the continuous implementation process until successful completion and termination. So again, let's look at this. Strictly defined, logically related practices, methods, and processes. What about project methodology? Methods and processes that determine how best to deliver, develop, control the project through the continuous implementation process to completion. Okay, so it's adopting an approach. It's not chaotic. It's not all over the place. It's actually a process that you adopt in order to achieve your end goal. A project methodology, it is scientifically proven, systematic and disciplined approach to project design, execution, and completion. So what stages do you need to do? What all the elements and all the things that you need to do within that project? And we will look at some of this, whether you take a waterfall approach or an agile approach. Methodologies for project management are about specifying what tasks need to be undertaken and when to do them in order to maximize the use of time and resources. So, we've looked at a systematic and disciplined approach. We looked above in terms of continuous implementation process for completion, but we're saying to ourselves, we need to know what tasks needs to be undertaken and when to do them to maximize time and resources. In addition to that, project methodologies, will outline which tasks to complete first, bearing in mind subsequent tasks that rely on previous ones being completed. So, depending upon your project, there are some tasks you can't start until other tasks have been done. If you're looking at the building of a house, well, you can't start building the structure of the house until you've done the foundation. So you move on from one task to the next. But there are some tasks that you can do at the same time. So again, it's really looking at those tasks to complete first. When we look at project things that we need to take into consideration, Methodologies used in projects management help define the scope of the project, time constraints, what resources are available, and when the project needs to be delivered. So once we've actually defined the scope and nature of the project, we then, if you've done this project time and time again, or even if you haven't done, you would put a time constraint to it. If you've done this project, types of these projects before, then you would have some idea as regards to how long this could take, and you would have some idea in terms of what resources are available and what you're going to need in order to deliver this project. If you are doing a loft extension and someone wants, I don't know, a loft extension with 2 bedrooms or 1 bedroom with certain features and functions, then the loft the company completing the loft extension would have some knowledge of the process, how long it would take, and the resources needed, their human resources needed, and so on and so forth. When we look at project methodology, we're saying the purpose of the project methodology is to allow for controlling the entire project management process for effective decision making and problem solving, whilst ensuring that specific processes, approaches, techniques, methods, and technologies are actually used. So we're saying with project methodologies, a methodology is a method of working. This will allow you to have effective decision making and problem solving, because you need decision making, because some things are straightforward and you need to do this, this and this, so you need decision making for that. But you also need decision making for when problems arrive, and what action are you going to take, and how is that going to affect the whole time limit of the date when things are supposed to be completed, and how will that affect the budget, and so on and so forth. Typically, a methodology provides a skeleton for describing every step in depth, so that a project manager will know what to do in order to deliver, implement, and work according to the schedule, budget, and client specification. Very, very, very important to have kind of like a skeleton of knowing what you want to achieve when. And this gives you a step by step. The project manager should know all the steps involved and have a clear picture in his mind of exactly what needs to be done when, and in what order, by whom, and with what resources, and if you're on time. Lastly, when we look at project methodologies, the goal of project management methodology is to assist all project managers within the organization to accurately execute the project management plan. So the project methodology allows you to develop a plan, a skeleton, effective decision making, utilizing and achieving, defining the scope, and reviewing the other constraints in terms of time and resources available. So when we need to understand what we mean by methodologies first, and what a methodology is, and then after that we can start looking at different types of methodologies. When we look at different types of methodologies, we're really saying to ourselves, how effectively can we make the profit and achieve the goal for the organization or the company, which will add value to the company, which is going to save the company money and make more. We're going to be looking at two different approaches. One is the traditional approach or waterfall approach on a step by step. Now, the traditional approach involves a series of consecutive stages, in the project management process, in a step-by-step sequence to design, develop, and deliver a product or service. It entails achieving the succession in the implementation process and provides the benefits of milestone-based planning and team building. So we're looking at a traditional approach, and we're saying it's a step-by-step approach, looking at the milestones that we need to planning and team. We're saying that a traditional approach will have various sections, and these sections will include the initiation stage, the planning and design stage, the execution stage, the control and integration stage, and then the closure stage, installation and maintenance. initiation stage. So within the initiation stage, we're saying, fulfill the preconditions, define the project objectives. What is it that you are trying to achieve? And this is important to be clear in terms of what you are trying to achieve, and having it written down and clear and agreed by all parties is very important. But different people having different objectives in their minds will, only confuse the issue and make customers unhappy, because they would have felt at the end of it they wouldn't have got what they wanted. So having it clearly defined, put in writing, and then signed off by all parties concerned, saying yes, that they agree these are the objectives that you're trying to achieve. The necessity of the project, why are you going to do it, the feasibility of the project, whether you can actually achieve this project within the budget that you've got, within the timescales that are required. The main instrument for decision making, project charter, is a statement of the scope, objectives and participants in the project. So again, you would produce a project charter. So in the initiation stage, you would complete all these things before you even move forward in a traditional approach, because unless you get the agreement and you know exactly what you're trying to achieve and everyone actually agrees this is exactly correct, then there's no point moving forward, because you would never meet the needs of the customer. The planning stage, we're saying that the planning stage has the various subsections, including reviewing the specification, the structure, the project breakdown, the series of tasks that are required, task allocation, well, who are these tasks going to be allocated to, time estimation, well, we're giving these tasks, how long do we expect these tasks to take, identification of needed resources, what are the resources that we actually need to complete this project, integration of time and personnel, and setting control gates to say that these stages are actually met to the standards that you require at this time within this budget. The execution stage, project execution plan. The project execution is the roadmap used by the project team to deliver the agreed project inputs. It outlines the responsibilities of the project team and key stakeholders. This is very important. The project, roadmap, so that everyone can actually see what needs to be done, when, the milestones, by whom. Project control. When we're looking at the project control, it's the act of reducing the difference between plan and reality of the project. Is it actually going to plan? Do projects normally go to time? More often than not, many projects do not fall within the timescales that they're supposed to be completed by. This is the last element in the plan: to implement, monitor, control the cycle of a project. Okay, controlling part. Most difficult part, to find out if things are actually on track, if people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and if not, to take the part of the project manager is to take corrective action. The project manager uses the information from the monitoring process to get and keep a project on track. Very, very important. When we look at project control, the project closure. The closure is the act of gaining stakeholders and customers' acceptance that they've actually met the objectives and the project is now at an end. Even if the project's not completed, they should be formally closed in order to reflect on what can be learnt to improve future projects. Therefore, it is not necessary to complete the project in order to close it. So we're saying here that if you do complete the project, then gain the acceptance of the target market, the customer, or if it's in-house, your boss or the board or directors or the management team, to say yes, this has been completed and they're happy with what has been achieved. Or even if the project is no longer continuing, to close the project down and then to review what lessons can be learned next time. Even if we look at a project, we can liken this to the project in terms of different stages, a waterfall stage or traditional approach. And some of these stages will include, preparing the building of a house, preparing the construction site, and pour the foundation. Number two, to complete the rough framing. Number three, complete the rough plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. Install the installation. Complete drywall and interior fixtures. Start exterior fixes. Finish interior trim. Install exterior walkways and driveway. Install hard surface flooring, countertops. Complete exterior grading. Finish, mechanical trims. Install bathroom fixtures. 9. Install mirrors, showers, doors. Finish the flooring off. Landscaping. 10. Final walkthrough. So again, here we've got an example of like stages of a house building. So in a traditional approach, you would follow this kind of methodology. Some might overlap, and some you may be able to do at the same time. But there are some you cannot start. You cannot start the number 2 without number 1 being done. So number 1 needs to be done before the whole project can be done, and before even number 1, obviously the architectural designs, planning and permissions need to be done before that. So there are various things that need to be done before you can even start. So this is typical of a traditional or waterfall approach. Type approach is kind of like an agile, and it's a different type methodology, an agile approach. And when we look at the agile approach, we're saying that modern methodologies do not focus on a linear process like the process we talked above, step by step, but they provide an alternative look at project management. Some of the methods are best fit for IT and software development, while others can be implemented in production, process improvement, product engineering, and so on. Now, when we look at some agile type methodologies, agile type methodologies are short-term delivery cycles. They're really not long distance, but they're short sprints of getting works done. They are agile requirements. They require or have dynamic team culture. They are less restrictive in terms of project controls. The emphasis on real-time communication. Here, the emphasis, as I mentioned before, on real-time, effective communication within all the teams to let everyone know exactly what's happening, and then to have maybe sub-teams to work out how problems can be overcome and what can be done is extremely important. And having that communication on real-time is key to agile methodology. The agile methodology aims to empower teams, encourage customer involvement, and manage change or risk throughout the project. When we look at agile type processes, the focus on this methodology is on the development of teams, projects, monitor and responsiveness to change, with again continued communication being the most important aspect throughout the life of the project. It should be noted that agile project management is not just a one set method, but rather a family of methods designed to respond to the challenges of unpredictable projects. So we're talking about teams, communication, and we're talking about agile with short, fast, deliverable sprints, and also we're talking about agile being able to go back and change things, whereas with traditional approach or waterfall approach, once you've finished one sequence, predominantly you don't go back and change it, so that option is limited. When we look at the principles of an agile way of working, well, the agile philosophy concentrates on empowering people and their interactions with early and constant delivery of value into an enterprise. Agile project management focuses on deliverable maximum value against business priorities in the time and budget allowed, especially when the drive to deliver is greater than the risk. So this modern methodology again is based on kind of like a dynamic teamwork. It's based on fast-paced sprints. It's based on problem solving. You can go forward, but then you can also go back. It's based on effective communication, up-to-date live communication, getting the most out to achieve your objective. But this is, again, agile type methodology is not applicable to every instance. When we look at the principles of agile, the project breaks a requirement into smaller pieces, which are then prioritized by the team in terms of importance. It promotes collaborative working, especially with the customer. So you're not only working with the team, you're working directly with the customer as well in terms of what we need to achieve. It reflects, learns and adjusts at regular interviews to ensure that the customer is always satisfied. It integrates planning with execution, allowing the organization to create a working mindset, and helps the team respond effectively to changing requirements. I mean, I know this because when for my college that I work for, London College of Contemporary Arts, we have various issues, like we're building this database, and this database is supposed to meet various needs, and we are working with database experts. We are working with our partners in Walsall College. We are working with all sorts of people and teams, and with other people in the organisation to review what needs to happen and making sure that these things are taking place, being tested, and being reviewed all the time to meet everyone's objectives. So the project itself will be broken down into many small pieces, and then these small pieces will be prioritized by different team members, again working together to put them all together to make it work. Look at an agile approach versus a traditional approach. If we were to look on the left-hand side kind of represents a traditional waterfall approach, where you have one step, then the next step is done, then the next step is done. On the left-hand side, we can see requirements and analysis of the software, design of the software code, testing, and the UAT. And then on the right-hand side, and this takes from January to October. But with the agile approach is more dynamic, more team orientated, more communication, and they break down the parts into smaller elements, into smaller pieces. So in January, you might look at the requirements, the analysis, the design, the code, test, user acceptance, and learning in iteration 1. So you might have 3 iterations and 3 different stages. So stage 1 of the software, stage 2 and stage 3. But you would carry out all these different functions within iteration 1 of what you wanted to achieve, iteration 2 what you wanted to achieve, and iteration 3 of what you wanted to achieve. Looked at this, we can see, in iteration 1 we wanted to have this on the screen, iteration 2 and iteration 3 what we wanted to achieve. But each time you would have a huge number of teams working within each month of each iteration to achieve that objective. But it would be more dynamic, more involving, more communication to achieve iteration 1, 2 and 3. But you can see that this process in the agile approach, which is a fast sprint, is expected to be completed within 3 months, whereas in the traditional approach, on the left hand side, you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months. So you're talking about 10 months as opposed to 3 months. And even if you think about it, you think about project designs, you look at the way the coronavirus in China and Wuhan, and the way they built a whole hospital, and the whole hospital they built it in 9-10 days, and the whole hospital wasn't just one level. The hospital is like 4 or 5 levels, and they built this in 10 days, a whole hospital. So absolutely amazing, fully kitted out with all the equipment, resources. So getting things done in terms of a methodology can be done, and that wouldn't have been a strict traditional approach, because so many things would have been having to happen at the same time. So for me, it would have been more kind of like of an agile type, irritation type approach that they would have adopted. But again, you need to explain, a traditional approach versus an agile approach, and then relate this back to the case example. Relate it back to the case example to say, well, what approach are you actually going to adopt in the case example to your company to get the cubicle system into an open plan? So which approach are you going to adopt? Okay. Here are some differences, characteristics between agile and traditional approach. Now, teams. When we look at the teams, we can see that the most successful thing is going to be the need for a good team. And if you can't work together and make this team gel, so you're all working together, it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve your. When we look at the stages of group development, which you've touched on before, you have different stages. You have forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjoining. In stage 1, you form the team, and you have different people that may or may not have worked together before. Storming, here is where the people are now jostling for position in terms of tasks and who's going to do what and position. 3, you have norming. Now people start to normalize exactly what's expected. They start to accept it or not. You start to performing, stage 4, where now the team starts to perform, and then once the objectives are achieved, adjoining, where the team actually comes to an end because you've achieved the objective. The question obviously said to critically evaluate. The question said to critically evaluate the management of teams. So you need to look at what achieves team effectiveness. And what achieves team effectiveness are going to be based from 4 different areas. 4 different areas in terms of the context. The context, do you have adequate resources realistically to achieve your objectives? Because if you don't, then your team is not going to be effective. Do you have the right leadership and structure? Do you have a good project manager that is able to adapt and be flexible and able to show different types of leadership styles? Autocratic, democratic, participative, laissez-faire, transformational. What type of leader do you have? You need that type of leader with the right attitude to be able to be flexible. Climate of trust. Is there a climate of trust that you all trust each other to get done what you need to get done? Performance evaluation reward systems. This touches on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and motivation, Hertzberg's 2-factor feelings in terms of satisfies and dissatisfies. Do you feel that you're being rewarded for the good job that you're actually doing? Rewarded by recognition, rewarded by financial rewards. Are you shown importance? Mayo's humanistic theories. So context is important. Composition of the group is important. Do you have the right composition of people with the right team members with the right abilities? Do you have the right people with the right personalities? Because sometimes you can have a great team and you can have the wrong personalities. I had a group presentation for my hospitality class at Coventry, and on paper these were individually the best students in the class. I put them in one group, they couldn't work together. These students could not work together, and they got the worst grade in the whole group, and the worst grades I've ever seen. So personality, can actually people work together? Allocating roles, allocating the right roles to the right people so people are motivated. Diversity, do you have the right diversity of people in that team? Size of the teams, too small may not work, too big may take too long. You need the right size of people in that team to achieve your objectives. Member flexibility and member preferences Again, things that need to be taken into consideration. And these are important because these are important to the motivation of the person doing the task so he achieves his objective in the most efficient and effective way. So this is important to motivational and humanistic behavioral theory. Work design, autonomy, skills variety. Is the task identity clear so you know what you're trying to achieve? Task significance. Do people know what the task significance are? Processes. Again, is there a common purpose? Is the goal specifically and clearly laid out in terms of what needs to be achieved? Is there team efficiency? What about the conflict levels? Are there huge or large conflict levels there? And is there social loathing? Again, when you're looking at team effectiveness, you have to assess, as the project manager, all these elements of context, composition, work design, and process. And within each of these 4 elements, you need to review the sub-elements within these. If we look at context, adequate resources, leadership and structure, climate of trust, performance evaluation, and reward systems. And all of these have a purpose. They have a purpose in terms of making sure that you have the right people at the right time to work together with the right abilities, with the right resources that are sufficiently motivated to achieve their objectives on time within budget. And that's what it's all about. It's having the right people to work together to achieve what you need with the right skills. And it is the project manager's responsibility to make sure that he reviews all of these, because unless he has all of these, then you're not going to get a team working effectively together. So again, very, very important. So when you're talking about evaluation of this, you need to be talking about these 4 different areas: the context, the composition, the work design, the processes, and then some of these elements in relation to your choice of company in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Okay, but then the other, some of the general guidelines for effective meetings. So what are some of the guidelines for effective meetings? Some of these include making sure that you start on time or getting there 5 minutes early. Prepare and distribute an agenda. Solicit recommendations and implement changes. Take people's voices on board. Otherwise, if people feel that they're not listened to, they won't give you ideas, they won't give you recommendations. And also, if someone gives you a recommendation, give them the credit. Don't take the credit for yourself. Assign good record keeping. Review the agenda and allocate time for each item. Prioritize issues considering time constraints. Encourage active participation. Summarize decisions. Review the assignments up for the next meeting. Give a summary of the meeting to appropriate people. Recognize accomplishments and positive behavior. So these are some of the guidelines for running effective meetings that a manager should take on. So let's go back to the questions, because so we're saying it's a PowerPoint presentation, 10 to 14 slides. You have to select of your company of your own choice, and you have to remove the cubicle sections within an office and to make them open plan. I'm saying that you need to provide 2 definitions of the project and then give you some of your own views. Review the characteristics of the project and relate this to your chosen company task. Okay, so we're looking at the characteristics of the project, and then the role of the project manager in those projects in terms of his skills and traits. After that, you kind of need to discuss what do we mean briefly by methodologies. So what are some of the characteristics of methodologies, and what's the purpose of methodologies? Then you need to discuss both traditional and agile type methodology approaches, and then relate which one you're going to use. Are you going to use a traditional approach or an agile approach? Which one are you going to use in relation to your case assignment? And then you need to critically evaluate the composition of your management of teams who you would choose to conduct your company project. So review the composition of the teams and how you would conduct your meetings and how things would be conducted. Finally, conclusions, and future changes. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope it's been in the conclusions. We can see we have actually covered the key questions, assessment criteria, and we've broken the questions down, as well as identifying the key words. We've defined the project management, as well as looking at the characteristics and the role of the project manager in terms of requirements of his skills, common traits a good project manager should have. We have looked at methodologies. What do we mean by methodologies? We have looked at methodologies in terms of different types, a traditional approach or an agile approach. Then we looked at team management and how you would conduct your teams. And then obviously we've related this to the case example, which is a presentation, PowerPoint slides, 10 to 14 slides with a 15-minute presentation. Obviously the assignment deadlines, the assignment deadlines, but we need to do this as soon as possible to start doing these presentations. So I hope this has been helpful from Mr. Tan. Thank you.